Hello, I'm Suyeon and I study English literature at Yonsei University. Thank you for coming to watch my video. In this video, I'd like to introduce Trifles, one-act play written by Susan Glaspell in 1916. Trifles presents a murder case of Mr. Wright. The play begins in Mr. Wright's house, where male characters, the attorney, Mr. Peters, and Mr. Hale, investigate thoroughly to find out the motive for the murder, while female characters, Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hale, constantly focus on the trifle things. Here, I want to point out three important and notable symbols in this play. First, the names of the characters. At the character list from the beginning of the play, we can see all of the male characters' names. However, female characters' names are not shown in the character list. Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hale are very important characters in this play because they find out the motive for the murder, but we never know what their first names are. In contrast, we all know the male characters' names, even though their roles in developing the plot are much smaller than those of women characters. In a number of other literary works, we can see that a person's name can signify the person's identity. So, by not giving names to women characters on purpose, this play focuses on how women are marginalized and denied of their identities as free and independent individuals. Next, the bird is also an important symbol. Mrs. Wright's bird is a canary, which is famous for its beautiful singing. Likewise, Mrs. Wright used to sing in the choir when she was young, and Mrs. Hale says that come to think of it, she was kind of like a bird herself. So, we can identify Minnie Foster with the canary in that they both use singing to express themselves. However, the bird is found outside its cage with its neck wrung out. Also, according to what Mrs. Hale mentions, after she got married, Mrs. Wright's personality was changed into a lonesome person with lots of secrets, although originally she was lively and cheerful Minnie Foster. And for both of the cases, the death of the bird and the change of Minnie Foster, it is possible to assume that John Wright, her husband, would be the reason. Mrs. Hale says that Mr. Wright didn't like singing, and she also suspects that for that reason he killed the bird. Although we do not know what exactly he did to his wife, we can conclude that Mr. Wright might have oppressed his wife's cheerful personality, singing, and Mrs. Wright herself as he twisted the neck of her bird. And lastly, the trifles, more precisely the trifle things in the play, are actually not trifles. They play key roles in the development of the plot. In the place of the murder, Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hale show interests in bread, fruits, quilt, and a bird, which male characters consider unimportant and easily ignore. However, what they saw as trifles was the very clue of the murder case. Seeing the quilt that Mrs. Wright was sewing, two women wonder whether she was going to quilt it or not it. At first, this question was just from their mere curiosity, and they themselves admitted that it is a small thing. But as the story goes on, their curiosity about little things becomes crucial. And thanks to that curiosity, women could find out the motive for the murder, which male characters could not find. Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hale see the neck-twisted bird and conclude that Mr. Wright killed that bird. And from that point, they get to understand the oppression that might have conflicted on Mrs. Wright, and the reason why she killed him. So, when male characters ridicule females, asking whether Mrs. Wright was going to quilt it or not it, women answer them not it, which has double meaning male characters couldn't understand. Not only means the way of quilting, but also means that Mrs. Wright killed her husband with a rope on his neck. Therefore, although women characters in this play seem to be deprived of their identity and oppressed by the male, they show that sometimes what men call as small things can have significant meaning. And I think it is the expression of their own identities and resistance to male's oppression. This is the end of my video. Thank you for listening.